Hello, and welcome to Book 5, Chapter 8 of You Should Be Reading. Today I'd like to talk to you about How Few Remain by Harry Turtledove. This is one of the 5 books that I was challenged to read by viewers of mine who have sent in little videos for me a little while back. You can check that one out. There is a special video on here called I Should Be Reading, which I've done. And this is one of those 5 books. This is the 4th book out of the 5 that I've read. The 5th book, Ghost Talkers, um, by Mary Robinette, I think Mary Robinette Kinnewell, I'm probably messing that name up. That one is not coming out till October. So it's going to be a little while before I get to that one. But I'm glad I finally got through this one. Oh, this book is a little problematic. I have conflicting feelings about this book for a number of reasons. Now, I am still glad I read it. Make no mistake about that. I'm very glad that this book was suggested to me by one of my viewers. It is very interesting. It's an alternate history book by Harry Turtledove, who is pretty much widely held as the master of alternate history. He usually does a lot of stuff involving the states and certain other things, back in the days. Um, and I didn't know that going into it, but this particular book is full of characters that are real life people back in the days. You've got Abraham Lincoln, what's his name? Theodore Roosevelt, General Custer. You have Samuel Clemens, otherwise known as Mark Twain. You have Frederick Douglass. You have, who else is there? There's a General Stewart. Geronimo is in this. Uh, just a bunch of things. And I don't know exactly if all of the characters in here are actual historical people or if just the major ones are, the ones that are most easily recognized. I'm not 100% sure on that. But what is it about? It is about the Second War between the states. Because the premise in this one is that during the First Civil War, there was certain orders that were wrapped around a few cigars, I guess, that had been lost by the Confederate Army, found by someone in the United States Army, and thus several plans were known ahead of time and able to be headed off at the pass, so to speak. In this book, those orders were found by a Confederate soldier and returned, and thus, because of that and other reasons, the Confederate States wins the Civil War and separates from the United States. So you have the United States to the north, the Confederate States of America to the south. And in the Confederate States, slavery is still legal because that's one of the main reasons why that Civil War was fought. Not just because of certain other things, but also because of that. And yeah, because of that, there this book was a little problematic for me to read because I found quite a few sections in it, certain viewpoints held by characters, both major and incidental, to be uncomfortable. To anyone of African or African American descent, it might even be worse because, make no bones about it, I'm about as white as Wonder Bread. I can't really claim to be otherwise, but I found it rather uncomfortable. However, that being said, I don't believe Harry Turtledove, the author here, is attempting to be racist in anything that he's written here. As a matter of fact, I believe it's quite the opposite, which I'll get to in a minute. But this particular, the way it is, the characters and whatnot, the time period. This is like 1881 is when this book happens. Around 1881, and 20 years, I think they say 20 years after the Civil War in the States, there's going to be racism with characters. There's going to be racism in the book in terms of the context of the story, not in the writing, but in the context of the story. There's going to be racism. You can't avoid that. It was a fact of life back in that time period, and he's very faithful to that time period in terms of how characters speak, how they act, etc., etc. And it's very interesting. Um, most most I enjoyed reading in this book was reading with Samuel Clemens, aka Mark Twain, who didn't write any stories, but apparently is a newspaper man in Los Angeles or California or something. Uh, doop 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 doop. Yeah, I think it's down in California, in Los Angeles or San Francisco. One of those two. He's a newspaper man, owns a newspaper, is like the chief editor of it and whatnot. Writes editorials with his particular scathing wit. Abraham Lincoln is still alive, touring the United States, talking about the plight of the worker, and seemingly seemingly a communist, or rather a socialist, uh, which is really interesting. There's an entire stretch of the book where Abraham Lincoln's stranded in Utah, having to deal with the Mormons and the civil unrest there due to the Mormons' uh, belief in polygamy. All kinds of interesting things. There's a German attaché involved with the United States, uh, who's a soldier and wanting to observe how the Americans do war, and offering to train the Americans, the generals, in how the Germans do war, because they're at odds with each other. There's a lot of interesting bits in this book. However, it wasn't just the racism inherent in the story to that time period that made me uncomfortable at points. Um, I'm sorry, Mr. Turtledove. I'm sorry, but there's a couple sex scenes in here, and they really didn't need to be included. That could have been glossed over. Um, and the writing itself in general was, I'm not going to say it was a slog to get through for me, because it wasn't. As I said, there were parts of this book that I was intensely interested in the characters, Samuel Clemens, Abraham Lincoln. There was a couple others I can't offhand. The general's name, Schifflin, German general. He was interesting to read about, and Frederick Douglass, um, his his character, and from the actual historical person of Frederick Douglass, but his character in this book, some of the things he went through were both interesting and kind of harrowing as well. Because I had mentioned incidental racism. That's where you'll see a lot of it, is with Frederick Douglass's character, because there will be people that aren't treating him badly, but there's still that undercurrent of even even white people that are on his side, that are United States citizens like Mr. Douglas is, still don't treat him as an equal until perhaps after they know who he is, and hear him speak and how eloquently he orates. And even after that, may not treat him like an equal, or may even hate him There's a lot of that in there. And reading about it, especially in this book, made me very uncomfortable. And it's not something that I enjoyed reading about. So there were parts of this book that I were interested in and enjoyed reading, but there was equally as many parts that I didn't enjoy reading. Uh, that was a bit. It was a bit tougher of a book for me to get through. It took me longer to read than a book normally of this size does. Um, if I'm enjoying the story, enjoying the characters and whatnot in a book, I will read through it fast, and it will be quick. And if I'm not, it'll take me a while. So I have conflicting feelings about How Few Remain. Uh, Definitely am glad I got to see it, got to read it. One of the really interesting bits that I found, and I didn't realize this until toward the end of the book. It didn't click with me. There is the president of the Confederate States of America in this particular book. Is The Confederate States themselves have allied with England and France, and because of that alliance, they were able to secede at the end of the First Civil War from the United States. And now those allies are pressuring the Confederate States to abolish slavery um, in their country. But the majority of the populace don't want to. They want to keep having these Negroes uh, or African Americans. I'm not sure what the I'm not 100% sure what the correct term is to call them. In the book, they are called worse things than Negro, uh, but that's one of the main words that tends to be used the most politely. They're pressuring the Confederate States to abolish slavery, to manumit, is one of the words they use, which I had to look up. It's a new word I've learned, but to manumit the Negro, um, mostly because only one other nation at that time in the book uh, has slavery, which is like Brazil, and Brazil is currently emancipating them down there. So the Confederate States is like one of the last holdouts, pretty much. And most of the quote unquote civilized world doesn't have that. So, because of those political concerns, those economic alliance concerns, the president, who knows that a war is coming with the United States because the Confederate States have just purchased two provinces from Mexico, thus having their particular country, the Confederate States, stretch from one ocean to the other, which would make it much more possible for a railroad to go from sea to sea, which would make things a lot easier on the Confederate States than it currently is, even though they're doing all right. So because of this, the United States are like, no, no, you can't take those provinces. No, you have to give them back. We're going to go to war with you because you've bought these provinces, unless you don't. So the United States kind of overstepping their bounds in the political arena when they come in and do this and start up this war. And the president of the Confederate States, Longstreet is his name, he knows that the United States is probably going to go to war, but they have to be the ones to attack first. So he kind of holds off and whatnot on attacking and ensures that General Jackson knows to do that. And when the when the war is all kicked off and everything, um, he has he has basically gotten England and France's assurances to help them fight the second war, with the promise that after the war is over and ended, he, the president of the Confederate States, will uh, manumit the Negroes under his care and basically the ones that he quote unquote owns, even though you can't own a person. Uh, but back then you could. So he's going to do that himself. The president of the Confederate States is going to do that publicly and encourage any other um, owner of slaves to do the same, which could cause a lot of problems in the Confederate States. But that's what he's going to do because because of this whole scene, because of how this all works out, that he's planning on doing this and he's given this promise because he believes that this is the right thing to do, even though personally he doesn't want to give up his slaves. He doesn't think anyone should anyone should have to. Personally, he believes that. Politically, however, he knows it is the best play for the Confederate States to make. Because even though they'll be free, he knows they won't be equal. Equal in word only, but not in practice. Which is one of the reasons why he went through with it. And because of that, because of this whole scene, as I mentioned, I believe the author is making a statement that one way or another, slavery down in the south of the United States would not survive. Either the United States had won the Civil War and abolished it throughout the United States, or the Confederate States, as is postulated in this alternate history, won the war, and then due to the changing political nature of the world, the shrinkage of the world, as information and technology advanced, because of that, this ever-changing political nature, slavery would have been abolished eventually. And that there's no way for it to literally continue forever. One way or another, eventually it would come to an end. And that I found very interesting because, as I said, I didn't realize it till I was pretty close to the end when I'm like, wait a minute, he's kind of saying that this is happening. And it was rather interesting, rather cool. I've been rambling on about this book for, almost 17 minutes now. So, yeah, as I said, I've got conflicting feelings about this book. If you're ever interested in alternate history and whatnot, if you like Harry Turtledove but you haven't read this, chances are you'll probably like it because it's more Harry Turtledove, even though I haven't read anything else by him. If you haven't read any and you're interested, if what I've said to you doesn't turn you off of it, give it a shot. You might like it, you might not. I don't know. As I said, I can't say that I liked and enjoyed the book, but I can't say that I didn't enjoy it either. It's one of those books that kind of straddles that line for me. I will say that I definitely enjoyed it more than Ghost of Chance, which I couldn't even finish reading. So it has that on it. But I'm going to leave this video here. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, if you like what I'm doing, please give that like button a tap. Give that subscribe button a tap as well if you haven't already, so you can be kept apprised of when I do new videos. Usually try and get a few videos out in a week as I can, and throw a comment in the comment section. What do you think about How Few Remain? I know one of my viewers will definitely be throwing a comment in here, the one that suggested it to me in the first place. So yes, he was interested in what I thought about the book. There you have it, sir. That is what I think about the book. Definitely interesting, but problematic in a way or two. But still, glad I read it, and glad I got educated on some things. So, do all that, and until next time, my friends, remember, you should be reading How Few Remain by Harry Turtledove. And I'll see you next time.